Excellent. Okay, so I will, with permission, I'll get started and people can kind of keep floating in here. So thank you all again for coming back. We're on day 2 of the skills lab with the amazing Stacy and Austin. Stacy is our senior database consultant. We did intros yesterday. Long history of being a Razor's Edge nerd and general problem solver. My favorite Stacy story is I met her back when I was a consultant and she was working for a client in Kansas City. And we were running a big giant campaign and we needed to build like some very specific website type thing. And the person who was in charge of that really didn't want to do it and like dragged her feet for about 2 months or so. And then one night Stacy had had enough and she stayed late and I think we ordered pizza and she got a bottle of wine and she did the whole thing in one night. Like she had nothing to do with what she was in charge of, nothing to do with database. And we came in the next morning and Stacy had built us the website that we needed and that we've been like pulling our hair out for months and months. So from that day, 10 or 12 years ago, I thought, oh man, I got to work with her a lot more often. Austin is here as well, our database consultant of Facebook Razor's Edge forum fame, where I've yet to find something that Austin is not incredibly helpful and knowledgeable on. Thank you for that. As background, we'll do a 1-minute commercial of our sponsor, which is us, Ask Genius. We had some people that reached out to me and asked how it worked. I will not do a live demo, but here's a 30-second version. You can find Ask Genius in the Blackbaud marketplace. It is a tool that we built first really to help ourselves and our consulting work we do, raising tens of millions of dollars a year for clients. We needed a good way to set ask amounts. And when I say ask amounts, I'm talking about this. You send out your direct mail, you have a pledge card, and you need a way to take all the data inside of Razor's Edge and arrive at the perfect ask amounts. So this is what it looks like. You can go to askgenius.com. You can tell it if you want 3, 4, or 5 asks in your string. If you're on Razor's Edge NXT, which everybody here is, it actually connects and syncs directly with your NXT environment. You just log in like Stacy did yesterday when she was showing the Power Platform. You choose your algorithm. You can choose if you want to be really aggressive and raise a lot of money. You can choose if you want to be really conservative and raise a little amount of money, or somewhere right in between. We recommend doing the right in between. Then it does all the math for you. So it synced your database. You've chosen your algorithm. It pulls all that data and looks to see their giving history and wealth research and zip code affluence and all that stuff to present you with a wonderful display like this, which says, here is what you're about to ask all of your people for. And you can go in and adjust those ask amounts up or down. So it will set the initial ask string for you, and then you can change them individually or as a group. You can also click on a little button that says, why are we asking this person for this amount? And it will pull up the exact reason. And it might be, oh, they gave $1 million 10 years ago, and I didn't know that. Or it could be, oh, it says they gave $1 million, and that is definitely a typo inside of Razor's Edge. I need to go in and fix that because that can't be right. So that's how it works. If you have any questions, we'd love to demo it for anybody that's interested. Just drop me a line and we can set that up. Okay, so that's Ask Genius. Last slide here. Stacey or Austin, you want to cover this and then I'll stop sharing and hand it off?
Yeah, sure. So we sort of skipped over this yesterday. So just as a quick reminder, if you see something or hear something that you like, feel free to use your reactions. Those will sort of pop up on the screen as like little fluttering emojis. And then if you have a question at any time during the presentation, oh, like that one. You can raise your hand virtually and we'll call on you and you can come off mute and ask your question, or you're welcome to post your question in the chat as well. So we just really want this to be a interactive discussion sort of workshop. And so that's how you can participate.
Awesome. Okay, Stacy, I'm going to stop sharing and let you drive. So I should be out. Excellent.
All right, you can see my screen. Okay.
All righty. Okay, so we're gonna do a quick review of some of the stuff that we covered yesterday that will be pertinent to today. So in review, our primary flow types are automated, instant, and scheduled. A vast majority of the flows you're likely to build will be scheduled. So something that runs on a recurring basis, whatever frequency you calculate for that. So that could be at 8:30 in the morning every week, or every day, or once a year, whatever works for you in the flow in which you're building. The next part are sort of the key concepts of Power Automate. So all of the pieces that come together, so connectors to triggers, what starts a flow, the actions, so the pieces that make up where you're teaching the robot to do all the different things, dynamic content, so fields from Razor's Edge or church management or wherever you're getting your data, variables, my favorite drawers to store information in, conditionals and expressions and all the sort of pieces that go into teaching the robot what you want it to do, right? So you never have to do the work again. So on to new things. So we're going to talk today about how taking what we discussed yesterday and starting to build your flow. So the first thing you do is obviously you're going to utilize that map or diagram, or like me, I put it out in bullet points in Word. So you're going to utilize your guide, right? So we're really going to take a look at your map, your diagram, whatever that might be, and you're going to break it down into smaller pieces. So really, you're going to divide it into phases by considering what pieces of your flow are absolutely fundamental to make it work. And you're going to start with those first. So it's going to be the bare minimum foundation of your flow is going to be phase 1. As you sort of think through all of the sort of extra pieces that make your flow super special and does all those super cool things, those will be additional phases. So when we talk through our sample today, we're going to talk about it first in phase 1, then 2, then 3, and so on. Really, when you're building your flow, make sure that you are saving and testing your flow constantly. I cannot emphasize this enough. There is nothing worse than building out your entire flow only to test it and find out that something at the very beginning is causing it to fail. And potentially you then need to rebuild your entire flow. Like I have been there where I've just been like, ooh, I'm putting this in and I'm putting this in and we're just gonna go, 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 go. And then I test it and like the second thing is it's causing it to fail, and there's pieces down the line that look at that second thing for information, and it's a mess. So save yourself the trouble and test your flow every time you add something new. It will pay off in the long run. And then, of course, as you finish sort of each phase and you get, phase 1 to work completely well and it's good to go, make sure to do a save as. So save as before you go on to your next phase. Also nothing worse than adding something new to your flow, having it fail, and you have nothing to go back to from before if you happen to completely and totally break it, which I've also done. And then we have a question, so I'm going to stop really quickly. Or we have Haley is raising her hand. So Haley, do you have a question?
I do, Austin, thank you. So I did do the homework last night, but then I was like, oh, I think I could do this. So I just tried in and I thought, okay, well, if I do this, and I got some of it to work, but then when I went back to it to try and make it a little more robust, all of a sudden it wasn't working. It just refused to save. And I was just wondering if you've ever experienced that where you try to add something. Well, in my case, I was putting content into an email notification, and I thought, well, this might look better if I tried it doing the HTML table, but the table just like broke the whole thing. When I put the output into the email, it just was like, nope, that's not going to work out. So I was just wondering if that ever happened to you guys before, and if there's a remedy for that. I love the save as, by the way, because I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to do this all over, but it wouldn't save, so it's still.
Yeah, so I found that if your flow is presenting with a failure, it won't save until you fix that particular thing, or if you resolve it in some way. Stacy, have you?
Yeah, there is that little up in the top right. I'll show you when we're building the flow today. There's a flow checker, and that can sometimes have some helpful information as to the actual error that's occurring, but sometimes it's in some super techie language that means nothing, and you kind of have to guess. So honestly, with things like that, just start where you see the error occurring and then follow every little character down and see if you can find what is off. And you can also, I have on occasion used Google to find answers to what does this error actually mean, and that typically doesn't. Sometimes it helps. It depends on what the error is, right? Like sometimes you'll get to a Power Automate forum that'll tell you exactly what's going on, and sometimes it's some really techie Microsoft background code thing that I don't get. So occasionally I'll just figure out a different way to do it. So, and sometimes even rebuilding it again helps you clear out whatever mistake you had in there, and you start again with fresh eyes, and then it works. So I don't have any particular advice on that error, but that is my usual process for fixing stuff that I don't know what it is.
Okay. All right, so here are a few tips and tricks, just general things to keep in mind. Whenever possible, utilize a sandbox. So a sandbox is something that you can get extra through Blackbaud. I believe there's probably an additional cost to it, but I don't know if there's a sandbox in general that people can use, but maybe you could reach out to Heather and the folks that are doing Power Automate support and see if that's something you can get access to. If you don't have access to a sandbox and you're using your live production database, then make sure that you're using maybe just your constituent record, as you'll know personally what data on there is accurate or not, or create a series of faux records where you can, sort of manipulate just a very specific part of your database before you make it go live, right? So I don't want you guys to do anything tremendously horrible to your live production databases. So just use caution if you are testing outflows in your live database. The second point is, as you test things out, be flexible. So a part of this process is your original ideation will change. Things will change as you start to build out your flow and discover sort of the intricacies of Power Automate. Something might not come together exactly as you originally thought about it or thought it would happen. And so just give yourself some space to adapt and change. And of course, as you update your flow, update your diagram. So, or update your notes associated with the flow, record, at least for me, this, I keep track of what failed or what didn't quite work as I expected, so that if I run into that in the future, I know what I did in the past, right? So I just sort of have this list of, oh, I tried to use this action in a conditional in this specific way and it didn't work. So I had to think about it in a different way, and I ended up doing X. So it just saves time, especially as you're learning a new sort of product and all the language and stuff that goes along with that. And then let's see. Yes, the most important part, give yourself space and time. So I always go into a flow and I say, oh, this should only take me a couple hours. And it ends up taking so much more time just because, Power Automate, you think, okay, this is going to take, these couple of actions to accomplish it. And it ends up taking so much more because the robot really doesn't know what you know. And you have to tell it in excruciating detail what you want it to do. So just, if you are setting an arbitrary date, maybe hold off on that on completion. Just say, this is a project I'm working on. Maybe if I make it to phase 2 by the end of the month, I'm doing really well, that sort of thing. So give your time, space and time to complete your builds as you move along. And, there's flows that Stacy and I have built where we've cranked one out in one day, and it's been really simple and it works really well. And there's maybe some more complex flows that we've spent months and months and months working on and trying to get to a point where we can share it with someone, or even it does all of the things that we want it to do. So, just give yourself space, I guess, would be my recommendation. So that's my bit.
Awesome. Before we demonstrate building a flow, Haley, do you have another question still? Your hand is still up. No? Okay. All right. Let me figure out how to get out of this. Okay, so can everyone see my Power Automate? So what we're going to do today is I'm going to build for you in real time the phase 1 of this of the flow that we're doing, and I forgot I had a slide about that, so I need to show it to you. Okay. So we're going to build phase 1. So this is going to be the bare minimum of the duplicate finder. So as we talked about yesterday, we're going to look at records created in the last 24 hours. We're going to search Razor's Edge for potential duplicates, and then we're going to send an email to myself.
You need to advance one slide. Okay, sorry.
So thank you. So this is what the you probably remember the little drawing that we had yesterday that had a bunch more stuff. So this is the very bare minimum, right? So we're going to trigger it. We're going to schedule it to run daily. We're going to create a variable, which is one of those drawers to keep our list of duplicates in. We're going to find all the constituents from the past 24 hours. We're going to search them just by email. We do want to add more searches than that, but for now we're going to do only email. If there's a match found, we'll add it to the list, and then we'll send ourselves an email. So that is going to be the kind of basic plan that we're going to start with. And this is kind of the kernel of our flow, right? This is the sort of proof of concept. Like, if we can do this, we think we can probably do all the other stuff we want to do. So, all right. So now you should see my Power Automate, yes? Okay. So to start a new flow, I'm going to click on New Flow. And it gives me all of these options. I can start from a template, or I can choose one of these. We're going to do this one scheduled. And we will name this phase 1. And I'm actually going to ignore this stuff because we're going to set it up once we get into the flow. So we'll go ahead and create it. So this is what the inside of a flow looks like. It's going to have lots of pretty colored boxes at the end and be very lovely. But it starts out with just showing us this is the trigger of the flow. So the first step is the trigger, and it shows us when the flow will run. So in this case, it's a recurrence, and we want this to run every 1 day. There are advanced options, so we're going to put that in Central Time, where I am located. And I wanted it to run at 10 o'clock p.m. So we'll select 22, and it is now set to run at 22 every day. General best practices when working inside of Power Automate. These actions and triggers all have a little name that is what you search for when you want to add them to a flow. Good idea to always add notes to that for yourself so that you know when you're looking at, 35 steps or whatever the final flow ends up having, it's easy to find the one that you need if there's an error, if there's something that you want to change. So this one is less crucial, but we'll do run every day at . To do that, you click the three dots, you choose rename. I like to keep the original name of the action and then type my little notes to myself after this. So that's basically what we're going to do. We're going to add a whole bunch more of those. So the first thing we want to do, we're going to need to add, or we're going to need to get a time from 24 hours ago so that we can tell the flow, look for constituents added after this time. So we're going to do a get past time action so that we can use this later in our flow. So when you click on, I'm not really explaining what I'm doing, you click on new step and then you type in the name of the action that you want. And the action finder box shows a list of applications or connectors up at the top. And then it shows a list of actions here and then a list of triggers here if you change to that. So when I search for get past time, this one pops up and that's the one I want. So I will select that and I'll say, I want to go back in the past 24 hours and that's all that we need to do there. So I'm going to change the name of this. So now we have that time and we're ready to tell the computer find things added since that time. All right, the next thing we need to do, and the reason that I know to do this is because this flow is at its core very similar to a really good one in the template showcase that is called, I think, Gift Digest Notification by Trevor Kelly. So the reason that I'm adding this variable is because I have seen that Gift Digest notification and that's how he does it and it works really slick. So that's why we're adding a variable here. So John, question, is the military time always the case? I'm pretty sure it's always the case. I have not tried to change it, but it will use UTC time if you don't change the time zone. So that is one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I've also only seen it as a 24-hour or military time. Yeah.
So we're going to do what is called initializing a variable. So that's how we basically define the variable and tell Power Automate that we need a drawer, and this is what it's called, and this is the kind of drawer it is. So we'll choose an initialized variable, and I'm going to name this potential duplicates. And there are all of these types in here that you will need to use eventually, depending on what flows you're doing. Just a quick run through. Boolean is a true false. Integer is a whole number. Float is a number with stuff after the decimal. String is a series of characters, so words and such. Object I've never used, but that's something like it's something like a definition of an array, sort of. I don't know. Austin probably can explain it better.
I don't know what it is. I've never used it.
Okay. And then array is what we want here because we're looking for essentially a list of things. So we're going to call that an array, and we're not going to put anything in the drawer yet because we don't know what it is. This will be added by the flow later on. Are we good so far? Any questions? All right, let's do a new step. And for this one, we're going to use our first Blackbaud action. Yay! It's going to be called the list constituents action. Now, we talked a little bit yesterday about how these are hard to find. They're not as hard to find when you're looking for connections, but when you're in here building stuff, they're super buried, right? So if I type in list constituents, I do see Blackbaud right here. So that's actually higher up than I expected. So this is the Blackbaud Razor's Edge NXT constituents connector, which is actually the one I want, but I don't see a list constituents action here. So what we want to do is typically easiest way to find Blackbaud actions is to type the word Blackbaud. And then you'll see the different connectors here in this row. If you hover over them, the full name of them will appear so you can tell which one it is. They do have little tiny icons, so you can eventually tell which is which. But we're looking for something in the constituents connector, so I'm going to click that. And now it's just going to be showing me actions within the constituents connector. So now I'll search list constituents and it will pop up right there at the top. Cool. All right, so the list constituents box is cool. You'll probably find yourself using this a lot. So you have two options here. You can either use a list that has been created in your Razor's Edge NXT. So if I click on this, a drop down of the actual lists in my database will pop up maybe.
Eventually.
There we go. So here are, all of the lists in our database. So I could choose one of those, or, and this is an or, not an and, I can click the show advanced options and use these filters down here to filter whatever records I'm looking for. This goes for all the list whatever functions in the database. So there's a list gifts action that is very similar, and it's the same thing. You can either use a list from NXT or you can use the advanced filters. So for this particular case, we could create a list in NXT, I think probably that says date added equals yesterday or something. I figured it would be easier to do it here. So we're going to use this add an on or after box, and we are going to add this time that we found up here earlier in the flow. So to do that, when you click in a field, this little guy pops up, and this is going to be also your best friend as we go through this. You'll get really familiar with this little box. So once you click in a field, in an action, this dynamic content box will pop up, and it's going to show you everything that your flow has already found. So right now there's not much, right? Like we have a variable with no value, so that's not on the list. And we have a trigger, which is not information. So we have a past time, but that's what we need because I want to tell Power Automate to go to Razor's Edge and find everybody added on or after 24 hours ago. So that's what we're going to do there. All right, moving along. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is search for a constituent. And as you can see, when I do that, it's not going to come up. So I'm going to remember to type Blackbaud and find the constituents, and then we'll do search. And there is actually a brand spanking new enhanced search for a constituent in here that I have not tried. So I built it based on this old version. So if anyone has a chance to play with that new one and tell me how it works, that would be awesome. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but we're going to use this one for now. So that one has options where you can tell it to search first name, last name, etc. This one, we're just going to put search text. So this is basically like the search bar at the top of your RANXT. You can type stuff into it and it's going to find you a record. And we want to search based on the email address of this new constituent. So I'm going to click in the search text field and I'm going to go to dynamic content and type email. And as you can see now, there is like tons of stuff over here in our dynamic content because we have listed constituents. And so this is all of the information that Razor's Edge throws into the flow when you do list constituents. So these are all the things we could potentially search on right now if we wanted to. But we wanted to use the primary email address right there. So we'll add that. And when I click on that, this apply to each magically pops up, right? Because Power Automate knows that this is a list of things. And so it's going to want to, for each person in this list, it's going to do this. Okay. Does that make sense? The way to tell what your apply to each is working off of is this little guy, this value right here. If you hover over this, you can see the kind of expression / code behind it, and it says outputs list constituents. So we're going to do outputs. So that's what it's going to do. It's going to take everything from this list constituents and it's going to search each one of those. Cool. All right, so I'm going to name this with that in mind. Apply to each constituent added in the last 24 hours. Katerina has a question. Can you have it search on multiple email addresses or only on the primary? You could have it search on multiple email addresses, but it will require several extra steps to pull those into the flow. So for the purposes of this, we're just doing the primary. It is possible though. So we're going to search for a constituent by email address. So I'm going to change the name of this to search for a constituent by email because we're going to add more searches as we get into later.
And by renaming the specific actions within the flow, that will help you later on when you want to find dynamic content from a specific one. So it will show up with the name within the dynamic content.
Yep.
Haley, you have a question.
I'm not entirely sure how to ask this question, but I'm going to try. So within the apply to each added, and I added the last 24 hours as well, and it's looking at the list constituents above. Are you able to say, look at for the email right there, and then also within that same box, look for a last name, or does that become its own step?
Yep.
It does another apply to each, so it has to cycle through again.
I have not actually tried it that way, putting all of the information into this one search bar. I have only done it with separate searches. So the way we're going to eventually build this flow is it's going to have a search for email here, and then we're going to do a separate search for last name and a separate search for whatever. So I am not sure what would happen if you searched that way. So that would be.
I think it would just return, like when it comes back and it returns, it would be like unique to that action. It would return that specific information, but I don't know how you would then categorize that information, say in like a variable to be used later. So, but that could be something you play around with. Maybe you discover something that solves all our problems that we've just thought about.
Yeah, let us know if you try it and it works. All right, so the next thing we're going to add is a condition, which exists right here, so I don't even have to search for it. And we're going to say, we're going to look for, we're going to ask if it found any matches, right? So in the search for, in my dynamic content now, I have search for a constituent, and it has a whole bunch of fields. And then it has list constituents, which is my thing up here, right? So what I want is the count of the search for a constituent by email step. So a count of the records that it found. So we'll put that in there. We're going to say count is equal to 1. By the way, spoiler alert, this flow does not work. So this is my phase 1 flow. Phase 1 flows seldom work as designed or as imagined, right? Because I've thought of a bunch of stuff later that the computer doesn't know. So if any of you catch any of my errors before we get to that point, there will be prizes. Okay. So now when I add a condition, it gives me these options. So I add the count of search for a constituent is greater than or equal to 1, because who knows how many it will find. If no, we're not going to do anything. If yes, we are going to add these people to our variable up here. So that is called appending to an array. Put that in. This is all done in a computer language called JSON that makes sense. I only know the very easiest rules that belong to JSON, but you will pick them up too, I'm sure. So we choose which variable we're using, and we only have one, so we'll choose that one. So to do the JSON, you do a curly bracket and then enter, and then this is what you do. You type the name of your field, and for this it's going to be name, because we're going to put our donor name in it. And then quotation mark, colon, space, quotation mark again. And then we're going to go to our dynamic content. And I'm going to type name here because I want to add the name of the result of my search into our list of potential duplicates. Cool. And another apply to each popped up, and the value here is search for a constituent by email. So now this is going to apply to each result of this step. And there could be 1, there could be 100, could be anything. So we'll put another quotation mark here and a comma, and then we'll do quotation constituent ID, quotation, colon, space, quotation, and we're going to add the constituent ID. Now, important distinction in Power Automate. There are IDs for everything in Razor's Edge, as you are aware. The ID that Razor's Edge NXT and Power Automate will use most often is called the system record ID. So this can be found in the properties in database view, but it's also found in the URL of the page in NXT. So there's, Razor's Edge, Blackbaud, constituents, / blah, blah, blah. So after the slash, there's a string of numbers, and it'll be 1 to 6 digits, probably, I think is as big as I've seen them. And that is your system record ID for that record. Yes, I will be happy to do that once it is done. So what I want to do here, since we're sending an email to myself, I want this to be the constituent ID that I use in database view to look stuff up, right? So I don't want the system record ID here. So if I were trying to tell Power Automate something, I would use this one. It's called ID and it says the system record ID of the constituent. But since I want that, user defined constituent ID from Razor's Edge 7 that I always use, I'm going to add what is called the lookup ID. So we'll put that in there, quotation mark. Since this is our last row, we're not going to put a comma and then a curly bracket. In the chat. Oh, Austin, thank you for that.
Yeah, I just the notification, like how to spruce up your notification tables post that I recently put in community contains a screenshot of something similar. So you can go there and take a look and see sort of the syntax that Stacy was talking about.
All right, so if no, we're doing nothing. So now let's move on. It's 3:07. This is taking longer than expected. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an HTML table. Haley, what we're going to do here is not going to help you, but the final flow will help you because it has some more steps for HTML tables that will potentially take care of your problem. So for my HTML table, it's asking me what data to put in it, and I'm just entering this potential duplicates variable. So there it is. So everything that we found up here got thrown into that variable, and now we're putting everything from the variable into the table. And now we'll send an email, and I'll use Outlook because that's what I have. There's also this email notification, Gmail's in here. There's bunches of options. You could make yourself a Teams notification or whatever. So I'm going to just type my email address in here. Okay. And I'm going to add the output from my create HTML table into the body of my email. And we'll save it. So this is now a flow that we presume will work. And once we save it, if there was anything wrong, there would be a big red dot right here next to the flow checker. And it would not allow me to save. But it did. So yay, that means there's no inherent errors in our flow. And then I would click this test button. So the next thing I'm going to do is, instead of actually testing it once and having us all sit here and wait, I'm going to just go back to my PowerPoint. So I will just show you what happened when I had 4 new constituents and I tested this flow, this baby flow with all of my few steps in it. So this is the first email I got. Actually looks really good, right? It has the name and constituent ID of 2 people with the same name. So pretty good chance that's a duplicate constituent, right? Love it. Here's the second email I got. It found me another duplicate, but in this email, it also included the first guy, right? So now I realize this is my first mistake. I have to clear out my array at the end of each search. Otherwise, it's going to give me all of them. And then here's my third email that I got. So Violet Weaver did not have a duplicate constituent in the system. And this is where I realized my most fundamental error. Does anyone know what it was? Did anyone catch it? This is the really funny one. When I searched by email, anyone? When I searched by email and I did my condition, I said, find me, or if you find a count of results greater than or equal to 1. But that is going to find the new record that we're searching on to begin with, right? So what I need to do is do greater than or equal to 2, because that will be the new record that's created plus the one that already existed in the database. So Violet should not be showing up in this at all. So that's a problem. And my third problem is that the flow actually failed because my 4th new constituent did not have an email address. And so so it just said, we can't do this. We can't look for anything for something that doesn't exist. So you lose, Stacy. So, so that is what those are the kind of things that we need to fix here. So I need to look for 2 records, not 1. I need to remove the duplicates from earlier searches so that my later notifications do not have them in there. And I need to figure out a way to keep the flow from failing if there is not an email. And then for phase 2, the other thing we're going to do is add those other searches by name and email address. John, how long does the test typically take to run with a flow of this size? It really depends.
Yeah.
This one wouldn't be very long, a minute maybe tops.
It'd be very quick, I think.
Yeah. And it's always a good idea to run something with one record or a small list of things too when you're testing it, so you're not waiting, 10 or 20 minutes or something, because some flows can go very, very long.
The good news, though, is once you test your flow, you can go back and use that previous data later on. So if you start off with a really small list just to test out your initial sort of build, later on when you start adding new things, you can go back and use the previous data from a previous test run. So it's not like you need to reinvent something in your database over and over again to try something out. You can use something that you've used before.
Yep. Katerina, how can we get a sandbox environment? Austin, I would say contact Heather McLean, who's managing this this conference, or your Blackbaud salesperson.
Yeah.
To help you. We have 3 minutes left, so I do want to show you guys how to fix this stuff, but I'm thinking maybe we should save that for tomorrow. We can fix these 3 errors tomorrow, and then we can show you the whole rest of the flow, and we can actually make it really work and do what we want. Does that sound like a plan? Are there any other questions that anyone has today? While you're thinking about what your questions are, we have another optional homework assignment, which is start building your flow. So figure out what phase 1 is, figure out what the bare minimum is so that you can figure out if it works and if you can do it. And then test it as you add things and update your diagram and your, take notes as everything changes and save as you go. So if you're about to make a big change to a flow, save a copy of it. Anything else? Questions, comments, concerns? Sandra, go for it.
So the question I have, I want to search my gifts for a particular fund. They're supposed to have an attribute added to them. So I want to know if that attribute was not added. But I kind of get lost after you trigger the flow and you trying to figure out what to do after that.
Yep.
So figure that out.
So this will be, you'll probably list all your gifts that need to have, I think the way I would do this, you'll list all your gifts that need to have the attribute, and then you will have to go out and get the attributes for each of those gifts. So that'll be apply to each. Yeah. And then you will use a condition or maybe a filter array to look at that specific attribute, like, do they have this? And then if they do, yes, no, yes, no.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
There's going to be a conditional involved and probably a few steps to get down to the granular detail of the custom fields of the gifts in which you want to check.
Okay. All right. I'll find out how far I get.
Yep. Yeah. Give it a whirl. It's a good project. And actually something similar to that is one of the first things I worked on with constituent attributes instead of gifts. So there are definitely ways to do that. Elizabeth is asking, are the filter options and criteria for lists the same in the workflow as they are in the front end? Basically, more or less, the things that are in NXT exist in Power Automate.
Yeah, Power Automate, like, you might be able to approach it a little bit differently than how the constraints that you're experiencing in WebView when it comes to lists. So a good example of that is the past time kind of thing. Instead of saying yesterday, you can dictate how many hours you want to look for, or a specific range that can be dynamic. And you can also search on like minimum amount to maximum amount. So there's like, it's a different way of looking at the same coin, if that makes sense.
Yep, you'll have the same data, basically the same fields available to you, but you can probably do more things with them than you can in NXT lists for sure.
And then we are at time. So if you have a time constraint today, feel free to step off. This will be recorded, or it is being recorded now, and should be available tomorrow in the on-demand section of your event hub. But if you would like to stick around, we're happy to keep answering questions.
Absolutely. Should we go to Kelly next?
I just had a quick question. In the previous session, they were talking about Power Automate being able to like transfer export files from the FTP to a local FTP
Mhm.
or server site. I was wondering if Power Automate can evaluate if that file is actually has any results in it. Like I have a process where I'm doing an export using Q. It's exporting to Excel if like, football had any gifts last week. But I have to look at the file to see if there's actually any information in there because the export won't not run if there's no results. It'll just export the header row and that's it. So I didn't know if there's a way for Power Automate to even evaluate that.
There might be. So in the Excel connector, there is definitely a get rows from a table function or action that you can do. You probably won't have a table if this is just exporting it straight to Excel, but there may be some other action. I'm sure there is some other action in Power Automate that can tell you if there's something in there or not. I would think that would be totally worth
because you can use data from an Excel sheet, therefore you should be able to tell that there's data in the Excel sheet.
Yep. Yep, I like that idea. That would save you a lot of annoying clicks every day.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited about the idea of using it to move the Q exports from the FTP to our local server and then converting them from XLS to XLSX because how stupid is that?
Why? I love that. Awesome idea.
I have end users that can't open XLS files because they're using different, like tablets or something like that. So it just says this is an unsupported,
Oh no.
There's so many things you can't do in the old version, 15-year-old version of Excel, which makes me nuts.
You could even, like, we're speaking a lot of hypotheticals here, but I presume that you can direct Power Automate to tell if data's in an Excel sheet, and then depending on the result, you could probably have a conditional that says if it does, do this with it. If it doesn't, do this, or don't do anything at all, kind of thing. So lots of possibilities just to take it from the one step you want to solve to maybe potentially solving other ones downstream.
Yeah, or even others before that. Like it's possible that instead of doing the export from Excel, you could just have Power Automate go look for the GIFs, and then it can just not do anything that day if it doesn't find any. So the stuff you'll think of all sorts of fun things as you go. It depends on what fields you need from Razor's Edge, really. So.
Yeah, I have to have fund attributes in order to do this process. So I think maybe somebody said something about those being added like yesterday.
Yep.
Yeah, you should go look. There's a bunch of stuff in there this morning that we hadn't seen before.
Yep. Yeah, that might do the trick for you. That would be awesome. Keith, what is your question, comment, concern?
Yeah, so on the lookup ID versus constituent ID, I knew that was certainly a difference with Power Automate and finding constituents and listing constituents. I have a different flow that is a large gift notification flow that pulls gift amounts greater than $1,000 and sends a notification to our team in terms of being able to thank them and lets the solicitor know that that gift had been made and so forth. When that particular flow ran a couple of weeks ago, it pulled in a planned gift that we had entered, and we quickly realized, hey, maybe we shouldn't put those planned gifts in this notification email. So on the gift type filter, I put in what I thought were the gift types, only it killed the flow. It wasn't working. Right. So are there resources that lets us know what's different in NXT that's not the same in database view in terms of like gift types or what they're called?
Sort of, but not exactly.
So I've kind of figured this out just by inference. So like looking at the output of the action to slowly figure out that, oh, gift types are for the most part listed without spaces.
Right.
So like,
And some of them have totally different names.
and some of them have completely different names.
So I was finding that most of the gifts are just listed as gift type donation. Whereas in a list of NXT filters, if you go to list and you're listing gifts in the NXT filters, what you'll find there is one-time gift.
Right.
And so one-time gift is not
And that is-
donation. And obviously in database view, that would be cash. It's listed as cash gift type.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I'm like, it's not even consistent within the platform. So how do we figure out what we're supposed to filter on when it's not clear in that regard?
Yeah, John, thank you for looking that up. John says that there's a knowledge base article. He's looking for that. I also posted a link to the
Document the connector.
definitions, the connector definition in Microsoft, and that lists some of the some of the actions and some of the fields, and you can find names there. I have just made myself that gift types is the one that's the most irritating. Everything else is going to be less different. So I just have a list of the gift types that I have like on a sticky note on my desk. Now I know what they are. But yeah, so donation, one-time gift, and cash are all the same thing. For the most part, the rest of them are the same without spaces, but not always. So
Right. I think the recurring gift pay cash is recurring gift payment.
yep, and
I
pledges,
figured that one
pledge
out,
payment. Yep.
Yeah, in the past, a little bit different of a track, but like if you're including the gift type on your notification table, I think in one of the flows I've built historically, I put a replace expression in to take the word that comes out of NXT and replace it with the one that my fundraisers were more familiar with.
Sure.
So there's that as well.
Yeah, I mean, for the purpose of the notification that I built out, it's not necessary to include the gift type. We just decided that no, we probably don't need planned gifts, anything that's like, non-revenue, to be put out in those notifications. So, but once I tried to filter on those, it just killed the flow, and I didn't know what happened or didn't know really how to fix it. So I appreciate the input. Thanks for sticking around, and this has been really helpful. Really enjoyed this session. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. Oh, Candy has a question. Is there a difference between the desktop Power Automate versus the Office 365 version? I'm working with IT on this. I used to have the desktop version, but I am not seeing it now. There is a difference. I have not used the desktop version. I think the desktop version is usually used for more local things.
Like local to your computer.
Right.
So
To your
automate
actual,
things specifically on your computer. I also have not used the desktop version. I found that everything I need is available within the web version. And
yeah, I've just when I pulled that up, they installed Office 365 last week, and
wow,
everything, was a little bit different. But the layout, when you were looking, when you were sharing your screen, that looks very similar to what I had used in the past, but this is not looking that same way. And so I was just wondering on.
Yep.
Yeah, I would stick to your browser version.
Well, and I think it is the browser version, but the regular one versus the Office 365, is there going to be a difference?
Not necessarily. It depends on the license that you have. So that resource that we gave you yesterday is a really quick and easy flow you can build to see if your license will work, because Blackbaud's connectors are premium connectors. So you have to have a specific license. So that's the only thing I would worry about if it's a, included in an Office 365 bundle. I would check that to be sure, because sometimes it seems to work and sometimes it doesn't.
Okay. I'll check further.
Awesome.
You can also, I put a link, I think, that works in the chat for that document. If not, you can access it through our session notes in the event hub.
Okay. Thank you so much, Austin. Stacy, anything else? I think we've covered, we've exhausted the questions. We've got one more session left tomorrow. Stacy, same time, same place, is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Excellent. Okay, so everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We will see you tomorrow at the same time, same place, and we will tackle everything then. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.